bring everybody up to speed with this study, and I think several of you have participated also in our surveys. But the idea is basically, I mean, we all know about the downsides of digital technology by now, right? And if you've seen the social dilemma that made it popularized it, and there's always a downside in every new technology. Well, with the car, it took us 100 years until we understood that we destroy the environment with the cars. And with this technology, actually, even after 20 years right now, it goes very quickly that we understand the downsides. And the downsides that we know, be it from Frances Haugen's revelations about the Facebook files, and especially right now, there are a lot of lawsuits going on that I'm also involved with and I'm cooperating with. For example, there's on 60 Minutes, we had a presentation with the lawsuits that are pursued against social media companies, where 1,200 families claim that their children were harmed by social media. 50 of these children are dead, be it by suicide or by accidental death. And it's a very dark place. So these technologies, they do have downsides where they drag us in. And basically how this is done is because these technologies, they are extensions of our mind. And that's where they get us, right? So they're extensions of our mind, and they're supercomputers which can think faster than our minds can, and it can dominate our emotions better than we can often ourselves with our capacities. And that's how we end up in these dark places, especially children who still have a developing mind, but also us ourselves. So if you study these technologies, this is a book that I like. It's from an interface designer, user interface designer. And he explains how these technologies work, these what we call persuasive technologies, that what I call mind extensions. And he structured his book according to the 7 capital sins of the ancient traditions, and it worked perfectly well, right? So you can actually describe how these technologies work just by discussing the worst that humankind actually is dealing with, or that human minds are dealing with. And how did we create these horrible technologies that do often so much harm? They do also a lot of good. I want to be very, but I'm not going to talk about the good today. I'm going to talk about the bad. But they do a lot of good as well. And basically how we came up with it is, of course, not that Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Page and Jeff Bezos, they sit in the basement together with the Joker and the Penguin and the Bond villain, smoking cigars and thinking about how to dominate the world. It's not evil intention. So here in Northern California, where I am as well, it's not evil intention that they're trying to do that. Basically what they're doing is pursuing a business model, and that business model sells ads. That's what it does. And it's a very old business model. We had this business model already back with the TV. In TV, since the 70s, we know what's the product. The product is you. So you are being sold on TV. The ones who buys is the ones who buys the ads. And what is sold is your attention. So you pay attention to an ad, to a commercial, and the Super Bowl attention costs so many $1 million because it has your attention. Now they perfected it basically with A/B testing. So they're trying to study really who you are, and this digital footprint that you give away tells them very exactly who you are. And with that, then they try to optimize what they're doing best, selling ads. So that's what they are after. And then since they know who you are and you leave the digital footprint behind, which in the TV age in the 70s, we didn't know who you were, but now we know who you are. So we can trigger you. And then what basically how this product evolved is they don't only sell your attention, they sell the predictable behavioral change that you have. So once I know who you are, I can trigger you. I can make predictions about yourself. And that's basically what they're selling. So on Facebook and so forth, if you buy an ad, you only pay for when people eventually get engaged or when they click on it, right? Or Jeff Bezos, what he sells on Amazon, is making predictions about what you're gonna be ordering in the future. And they do that by blind A/B testing, not by bad intention. I want to be very clear. So basically what they do is they have millions of experiments going on, and then they see which mind reacts to what. And this is how blind A/B testing works. So here on the screen, we have two different versions of a headline, for example, a purple one and a yellow one. And I see which kind of person, they study you with a digital footprint, reacts to which kind of headline. And then they try to optimize their goal, their utility function. And their utility function, well, that's what it comes down to. What's the, what are they after? What is their goal objective function? I said it's the attention, right? And they're trying to optimize that. Now, if I have your attention, I go a little bit quicker here, probably, because I think, yeah, we know how these technologies now work. Oops, sorry. So when I try to optimize, of course, your attention, what these machines then came up with, they go through all the variables, trying to understand who you are, trying to predict what you're doing. And what they found out is, obviously, I can do that best if I have your attention all the time. So I basically make you addicted. And many of the characteristics that these technologies basically have are similar characteristics of what we find in slot machines in Las Vegas. So this is an interesting book where they studied how slot machines work, how you can create a perfectly addictive machines. And many of the characteristics that these technology have, they have exactly the same characteristics. So they basically try to have your attention all the time, study you how you work, and with that trying to capture from you predictive behavioral change. So here's a model from a bestseller here in Silicon Valley. It's called Hooked, and I want you to walk really quickly through how that works. So this is a model that is built into many social media platforms, Instagram and so forth, and that's how it works, right? So you give people a trigger. And then you have an action that you make them act. You give them a variable reward, which is very similar to how slot machines work. And you get them invested into the product, and you give them another trigger. Now, I want to call your attention to, in order to have a trigger, I need to know you. So, I mean, the holidays are coming up. You're probably going back to your family. I mean, your family can trigger you the best, right? Because they know you really well. Now, these machines, they know you better than your family. They know you better than you know yourself. So that's how exactly they know how to trigger you. Then they give you an action, something to click on, a variable reward, very similar to the slot machine. They get you invested into the product. You already invested a lot, and then they go the trigger again. And that's basically how they make you addicted. One important quote of how that works best is, in order to initiate the action, go from the trigger to the action, doing must be easier than thinking. So it needs to be done with little or with no conscious thought. So all of this machinery here, in order to get you engaged in social media, works best when there's no conscious thought. So basically, you do it unconsciously. So many of these triggers that these machines pull, they're basically cognitive biases that you do without knowing that you're doing them. For example, you go for the more popular one, you go for the confirmation bias, you go for negativity and so forth. And when you're not in control, then that can get you really hooked, and you spend more time and you're more predictable. Because again, that's what I said, right? That's the product that they're selling. They're selling predictable behavioral change. So if you do it without conscious thought, you're very predictable. And that's where they are engaging. So I'm going very quickly on how these technologies work. But I think if you take, the only thing that I want you maybe to take away from how these technologies work is that you leave a digital footprint. Studying the digital footprint, the technology, the persuasion technology gets to know you better. Once it knows you better, it knows how to trigger you. Then in order to trigger you, it triggers you on the subconscious part of you, your cognitive biases, and that leads to predictable behavioral change. You click on it, or you keep on being engaged, or you make this purchase, and that is the business model that they're actually pursuing. So it works best when you are with no conscious thought. Now, on the other hand, if you would be still in control and have conscious thought, you're in control of your choices, then you might not be as predictable. And that's a definition of mental health that I really like. It's a definition that goes back to the 1960s from Rollo May. And what he says, the definition on the opposite side is actually, if you're in control, if you have the choice, that is his definition of mental health. So that's where we started. And we said he would define mental health as the capacity to be aware of the gap between stimulus and response, together with the capacity to use this gap constructively. So freedom is the individual's capacity to know that he is the determined one, to pause between stimulus and response, and thus to throw his weight, and however slightly it may be, on the side of one particular response among the several possible ones. Now, persuasive technology tries to eliminate that gap, right? It tries to eliminate the gap between stimulus and response by knowing you, triggering you in your cognitive biases, unconsciously triggering a predictable response that I can predict, whatever, with 95% probability in order to get you engaged. Now, our question was, are there people who have what we call digital immunity, who have this gap, who are really more in charge of their own responses, who have a big gap between stimulus and response, and artificial intelligence, even with all its manipulation, cannot get them to have these automated responses, right? So what's the level of consciousness, and what's the level of consciousness people need to have in order to be digitally immune to these kind of manipulations that these technologies exert on us? We didn't really know where to start, so we started everywhere, and we came up with about 130 different measures that we threw at people. So the first study, if you participated, you might remember, was very extensive. We had an hour and a half. And these different measures that we had, these 130 came from different groups. We had some development indicators, ego development. We worked with Terry O'Fallon's ego development indicator. Then we had some states, we might say. So these are more stages of consciousness. These are states of consciousness, mysticism scale, the NEDI scale, also Jeffrey Martin's, of course, persistent non-symbolic experiences. And we had some correlates of higher states with consciousness, mindfulness, self-compassion, emotional intelligence, and so forth, and also IQ in general. And our idea was that with these 130 measures on this side, we do some machine learning ourselves, and with the machine learning, we determine some kind of digital immunity that then correlates negatively, hopefully, with some kind of digital harms. And in digital harms, we threw a lot of things at people. We looked at social media harm, mental harms. We also looked at commercial manipulation, which is happening in Amazon a lot. For example, also in political manipulation, at misinformation, and so forth. And set up basically a mock social media environment that goes through these different things. So first of all, for 45 minutes, we measured people kind of like their consciousness with states, stages, and correlates. And then we made them go through normal social media hell for 45 minutes and observe what they were doing in our mock social media environment. And then try to correlate both of that. Now, we didn't have anywhere to start. So, and this is for the scholars among you. So we used the workflow they call integrative modeling. So that uses social science, but there's also a lot of computer science in order to combine these two data. And I'm not going to walk you through how exactly we model that, but it's basically we use machine learning also ourselves. And what we do then is we keep from all of our data, let's say we have 1,000 participants in our study, we keep 20% to the side, and we only analyze the 80%. We only analyze 80% of it. And with these 80%, we develop a model, and at the end, we test if our model works on this holdout sample of 20% of it. And even with this 80%, let's say with the 800 or 900 people that we had on this side here, where we basically do our modeling, there are different workflows that you can do, and you can also do some predictive analytics, and then you can do some explanatory, confirmatory analytics. And at the end, as I said, the idea is that you test that on the model that you on the participants that you did not touch. So the 200 that we had here reserved, and see if your model works. Our sample in the first study and in the second study too was a little weird. So a little Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So we don't expand too much internationally. So it's a lot. It's European and American, our sample. And then we started with trying to reduce our 130 measures of consciousness into different groups. So these are latent variables that emerge. We start with what we measured, for example, mindfulness, self-compassion, intelligence, NEDI, PNSE, that's Jeffrey's non-symbolic experiences, gratitude, emotional intelligence, and also development, stages of consciousness and age. And you see they create different groups, and we give them names, and we just give them these names because that's what the machine learning finds. The machine learning finds that these group together, we call them awareness, that these group together, we call it spirituality, Yeah, these group together, we call it receptiveness. And that's how we then create kind of like characteristics that emerge from our data, from this 900 people that we identified, and we try to describe their consciousness in iterative ways. And then we try to do the same. We do the same thing on the digital harms. And you can see on the digital harm side, some of the digital harms grouped together that have to do with mental health. We call it mental captivity, with emotionality, then with misinformation, these group together, naivety, then judgmentalism that has to do with the cancel culture, for example, people who are very judgmental on social media, and with stereotyping. So we also find some clusters here, and these ones are latent variables, so they emerge. The machine learning tells us what they are. And then we try to combine both sides, and we see how what we measured here creates these latent characteristics of consciousness, and how that then correlates with these latent characteristics of digital harms. And what we find, and I'm not going to go you through the different generations of the model here, what we find is actually a very strong correlation at the end. A very strong overall correlation that has different interesting subgroups. For example, mental captivity, mental harm in social media correlates with some certain aspects of consciousness, whereas misinformation and judgmentalism correlates with some other aspects of consciousness. Just like immunity, that's why I like the word immunity. So immunity there are a lot of different harms and a lot of different ways in your body to react to it, and they correlate differently with each other. At the end, we broke it down, in our 130 questions, we broke it down to 33 survey questions. We created 3 new latent variables here, or the model basically identified these 3 latent variables, and they come surprisingly mainly from 3 different measures that are known in the literature. One is mindfulness, good old mindfulness. It seems to be very important. The second one is self-compassion, which is very important. It's a scale from Neff. And the third one is NEDI, the non-dual embodiment thematic inventory from Bootlain. And you can see that with these 33 questions, these are really questions only, we create these 3 latent variables we call self-acceptance, self-knowledge, and inner stillness or equanimity. And they can explain more than 80% of the variance in digital harms, which is we were very impressed that we could find that. We find a correlation of over 0.9, which means 80% of that could be explained, so that people who are high in mindfulness, in self-compassion, in a non-dual embodiment, create a shield to digital harms that explains 80% of the variance in digital harms, right? So, and we were so impressed by that study that we couldn't believe it, and we thought like maybe we baked something into the data. And even so this test is actually now with our testing set. Remember the whole dot sample of the 200? So we could explain that, but we still didn't trust it. So we did a follow-up study and pre-registered it. And we did a follow-up study 2 months ago or last month. Maybe some of you participated in it. Again, 1,000 people participated. And in this follow-up study, long story short, we were able to replicate the same idea. So again, in the follow-up study with a completely new data set, we were able to explain 80% of the variance there. Then we started to think a little bit deeper, and it's like, okay, so where is that coming from? So where is this digital immunity actually coming from? And what do these states of consciousness like mindfulness, self-compassion, and non-dual embodiment have to do? And thinking more about social media, what they have to do is, right, social media is basically focuses a lot on the self. So you create your own persona online, and a lot of these mental harms that come from social media have to do with the identification of the self. And people then who transcended the self on higher stages of consciousness, if you take a developmental approach, and you guys know these models of higher stages, let's take Maslow's model. So the self-transcendent stage, which is on top of Maslow's hierarchy, people who transcended the self then don't get captured so easily in the world of social media, where we tried with social media studies. I said you, but it studies yourself, right? Your interpretation of the self. Then it tries to trigger you or your ego, whatever you have constructed there of your ego, in order to get predictable responses from this ego. And that's what they're selling. They're selling the predictable responses, the unconscious predictable responses of the self that you constructed. So what we have theorized is that people on a higher stage of development, people who transcended the self, they are harder to manipulate by this artificial intelligence. And that leads us to our current model. And our current model, so that's kind of like the update that we came up after the second study. It's a little bit more sophisticated, that model, and it goes in 2 stages, and I'm going to walk you through that. And sorry, this is still work in progress. That's why it looks a little bit messy here as well. But what we have now is 2 stages of digital immunity. We have stages of human development, where we have, so these are the stage measures like Maslow's measure, or this is a Terry or Fallon's measure of stages of ego development, which come from Löwinger and from Cook-Reuter. And you have human development then here, a stage development of consciousness, which seems to affect states of consciousness. And these are the different states of consciousness: self-compassion, mindfulness, and neti, things you can actually, you can learn very quickly through meditation practice or through a positive psychology practice, like self-compassion, which then creates these latent variables: self-acceptance, self-knowledge, and equanimity, which seems to create this shield of digital immunity, which again can explain 80% of the variance in digital harm. So it creates a negative correlation with digital harm. And here we can block 80% of these harms. Well, that's how far we got. We are trying to do a 3rd replication study right now, and hopefully some of you will participate in that again, where we test more this hypothesis, this 2 states hypothesis, where we have stages of consciousness creating states, affecting states of consciousness, creating this digital harm shield at the end. So that's where we're at. And that leads to also a very interesting question now, if we have that model, and I'm happy to talk more with you about it and pick your brains about it. Because if that's the truth, that it's stages of consciousness that matter at the end, the solution is not very easy, because artificial intelligence is already out there, and artificial intelligence is every day more important. So the conclusion that we're basically getting, if you now ask, so what do we do about that, is basically, well, we need everybody to reach higher stages of consciousness in order to protect us from digital manipulation. That means it's basically what we're finding is an argument why it is so important for humanity to evolve consciousness right now. And the reason why it's important for humanity to evolve consciousness right now is because of these digital mind extensions that have learned to manipulate us or manipulate the selves that we have constructed over a lifetime, and the unconscious biases that we have in that self. And so the argument is that we have to transcend the self and awaken in that sense in order to become conscious, not only about ourselves, but also about the manipulations that these digital mind extensions do to ourselves. All right, that's how far I got. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think we have some time to answer questions.
Sounds good. Yeah, fire away. You can see any questions in chat there, Martin. And we'll see if anybody raises their hand and wants to ask another way.
Yeah, how to follow the research? I can share some. So here, I mean, it's not really published yet. Many of the things are not really published yet, but some things are published, and you can find some things online. So, for example, this is the pre-registration that we're doing, and you can find also the first results are already published there. And if you follow me on social media, I will keep you updated with what we find. Yes, Mikey has a question. I can see your raised hand.
Yes, Mike. If you're there. Mike Billingsley.
Unmute. Okay. I wondered if it be done so that you would beat them at their own game. Is there a way that you could do a simulation for people that were at least interested in getting over the digital harm, where the simulation would prompt them, give them samples of your having their attention caught, and teach them as that process is happening to them to avoid it?
Yeah. Yes. And to be honest, our friends here in Silicon Valley, that's all what they're trying to do. That's what they put these little labels on the bottom, right? So when they say like, oh, Donald Trump says something, they're like, oh, this information might be contested, right? So they're trying to raise your conscious, they're trying to raise your awareness about that as it's happening. Now, studies have shown that it doesn't have any effect, right? It doesn't have any impact. I mean, you don't, like these little labels that try to raise your awareness while it's going on, they don't, until now we haven't found the real way of doing that. So people, they can read the label, but it doesn't have an effect, right? It doesn't really raise their consciousness on the spot. So it might be that we find ways there, and then I think more research needs to be done. And I do think there's a willingness of these tech companies to start to incorporate these things. Also give you feedback in real time, so the time well spent movement. So you can, on YouTube, when you watch YouTube, you can now program that it tells you after a certain time, reminds you, for example, hey, you already watched 30 minutes, right? Are you sure you want to keep on watching? So these feedback things, the tech companies try to incorporate them. They don't really have a big effect on it. So we need to find more about that. I was
thinking more of something that would have a game approach to it. And you collect points to the extent that you could avoid the snares and the traps of these different media things. But it would have to be an interactive thing that would give you immediate feedback. All the psychological studies that, McDonald's was happy to show salads because they knew people would eat more Big Macs when they had a salad choice. And they could call it healthy, but it wasn't, because that's exactly what they knew people would do. So anyway.
Yeah, it's tricky. It is tricky. These mind extensions are very, very intricately linked to our minds, right? So it's as easy as you self-identify with your thoughts and emotions. And it's easy to say like, oh, just step out of your thoughts and emotions. Yeah, and many of us can do that at some degree, but then in other degrees not, especially when we're in the machinery. So
great work.
Thank you. Gino, you have a question? Hi, good to see you again.
Hey, yeah, great to see you too. So, a couple of years ago, actually like 7 or 8 years ago, I gave a talk at for the Interpublic group at the Cannes Lion Festival, which is the largest kind of ad festival in the world. And the idea behind it is, what is advertising kind of in this digital age? And so the talk that I gave basically is like, with Facebook and Google, they can get a sense of where you're at. And if you look at a Stages model or a Claire Graves model or, Spiral Dynamics or something, by looking at what they're looking at and their interests, you can kind of get a sense of where they're at. And the premise is, just like there was like industrial, and then there's kind of green industry, there's, factory farming, and then there's kind of organic, what would the equivalent of advertising be? And the idea is that if you can get a sense of where they're at through their Google, Facebook, and everything, and what their level of consciousness is, then you know where they're going. And so the idea is that you can then tune the message so that they still buy the product, but you're helping them in their development, because rather than the fear, need, desire approach, is you can kind of help them move along because where they're at and where they're going. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's a lot of possibilities that we can do to help people in the future. So, first of all, we have to turn the dial down. Right now, there's a lot of damage being done because this machine learning is optimizing engagement and optimizing attention and optimizing view time in order to sell ads, right? Now, first of all, we have to reduce the damage that is doing, kind of like automating our minds in order to sell ads. But once this is done alternatively, I agree, we could actually do many more things, also helping people to develop, helping people meet them where they are at. That's what this technology is about, really getting to know a person, getting to know the self that the person has constructed and carries around most of the day, and then cater to the self and also help this person then to, develop more or explore more. And there's a lot of possibilities that we can do there. And people give away their selves with a digital footprint, just without wanting. So we can understand them much better and then help them to develop. But I think, first of all, you have to put not the cart in front of the horse and try to see the damage that's done right now and try to reduce that.